So previously, I looked at the Dell Inspiron 3252, Dell Dimension 2100, and Dell Dimension 3000. These are all home desktop computers that Dell made throughout various periods of time. So now I want to ask the question of, what was the crossover line? In terms of desktops, when did Dell stop making the Dimension, and when did they start making the Inspiron desktops? And so, we're going to look at the Dell Inspiron 530, the first desktop Dell Inspiron model, which superseded the Dell Dimension E520. So, let's get started. Now, for some context, we need to look at two different lines of computers, the Dell Dimension and the Dell Inspiron. And we're going to start with the latter. In 1997, Dell introduced the Dell Inspiron line of laptops, mainly targeted towards your average, everyday person. Now, while I can't find any sort of information regarding reviews, praising, or throwing tomatoes at the device, I can tell you that starting in 2003 and 2004, these laptops started to run into problems. A number of problems, for example, overheating issues, and also in 2006, battery issues. Yeah, there was a big battery incident in 2006, but with that out of the way, let's focus on the Dimension now. Introduced in 1993 alongside the Dell OptiPlex, these computers were home desktop systems aimed at being worth good value, and they were quite popular and still coveted by some to this day, due to nostalgia factors among other things. So in 2006, Dell had a 2x2 matrix of products similar to Apple heading into the new millennium, which was as such. If you wanted a home desktop, you'd choose a Dimension. If you wanted a home laptop, you'd choose an Inspiron. In terms of if you needed this stuff for business, for a desktop, you'd choose the OptiPlex, and for a laptop, you'd choose the Latitude. There were some outliers to this, such as the Precision, but for the most part, it was fairly simple and straightforward. So let's fast forward a year. Oh, that's a nice little, product matrix you got there, said Michael Dell. It'd be a shame if we were to change that all. And so that's exactly what happened. The Dell Dimension would be discontinued in April of 2007, although perplexingly, there were apparently models released in 2009. I don't know much about this, and it may be something to look into, but it's not something to look at for now. And it was replaced by the Inspiron and Studio lines, because now we're turning the Dell Inspiron line into not just laptops, but also laptops and desktops. And so that gets us to the Dell Inspiron 530. In terms of press insight, writer Rich Brown of CNET praised the Inspiron 530 for its high performance at the specific price tag. CNET's review showed multiple benchmarks, of which the 530 reached the best performance of each benchmark. Brown did argue that it was otherwise fairly unremarkable and stated it was fairly ordinary. Writer James Sherwood of The Register stated that there were a decent selection of processors, namely the Celeron Pentium 2 and Core 2 Duo, and they could get up to 1 terabyte of hard drive space, and that the PC was offered with the Blu-ray drive. Sherwood also said, if you didn't like the fact that it was bundled with Windows Vista, you could put Ubuntu Linux on it, and that the Inspiron 530 was offered starting at $349 US. Tech Radar's writer said that it was impressively powerful for its price, but warned that the price tag and performance meant that there were corners cut in other fields, such as the keyboard and display and whatnot. The writer said that stuff like application and GPU performance was acceptable, and if you could live with the oversights, it was a great offer. And then we get to PC Mag's review. Their writer, Brian Neal, stated that the Inspiron 530 was competent for everyday tasks and even heavier load applications such as Photoshop, but said it had a higher price tag compared to the offerings from competitors. He did say that its design had better quality compared to what compact gaming machines were putting out, and that was similar to the Lenovo IdeaCentre Center K210 in that it didn't have any bloatware. Overall, he said that it was a very capable value system backed up with benchmarks, but its rating was hurt by its shortcomings. And so I suppose that we should look at this thing proper now. So for some background, I got this computer back in January of 2024 alongside an eMachines T3304 and an HP Compact 6005 Pro mini tower, and just like the latter, I didn't get around to making an acquisition video on it until March of that year. However, I didn't really get around to using this thing at all until August and September of that year, and last used this computer in a video on Zorin OS 2.0 back in December. We'll look at that OS later. On the front here, we have two disk drive spots, of which one is occupied by a DVD drive while the other is not, and inside of this door, we can find a card reader, 4 USBs, audio jacks, and a cutout for FireWire. Meanwhile, on the rear, we have the power supply, VGA, 4 more USB ports, Ethernet, 6 audio jacks, and expansion cutouts. As for the inside, I don't really have many comments on it. There's a high-pro power supply, as well as your average cooling fan and memory and all the other things, and interestingly, the hard drives are mounted on the side of the case, as you can see here. And so let's power this thing on now. When this thing is powered on, it immediately gets very loud. The fans spin up quite loudly and whatnot, kind of comparable to starting the engine on a sports car. For reference, here's one of my other computers being powered on, and my own car for reference, because just to remind you, if you haven't been paying attention to the name tags, I own a 2020 Ford Escape, which is petrol powered. So, let's look at Zorin OS now. As I mentioned, I have Zorin OS. Shit. Zorin OS nuked itself. I don't know how this happened, and it presumably happened between me preparing to record this video an hour beforehand and when I actually recorded it, but looking in disk management, it is gone. Not like there was anything of value on there anyway, just kind of disappointing. On another topic, I have Windows XP installed on here, specifically Windows XP Service Pack 3, and looking at the thermals, SpeedFan provides some very inconsistent insights. How can this thing be both very hot and very cold at the same time? So, for a sanity check, let's look at what Specky provides. Fairly decent and competent and expected thermal stuff. And so let's put this thing to the test by pitting it up against a YouTube video, because of course we've got to do the YouTubeception. Oh yeah, the CMOS is dead and so there's the wrong tie, so let's change that. If you're looking for the thermals, pay attention to the left-hand side of the monitor, because that's where they are. And in terms of audio, it was clearly struggling. Thermally, it was still doing relatively well, but you get the point. But thermally, this thing was basically a champ. Even though when I put this in high quality stuff, it started to buffer and stutter and whatnot. So I think you get the point. I think this PC can't really play YouTube videos, at least in high quality, anymore. So let's move on to gaming. As for the first game that we're going to look at, it's FreeCiv, which I don't really know how to play. This is because I wanted to look at this game for gaming stuff in the video a couple weeks ago, except I couldn't figure out how to get it to work. It's basically free and open source Sid Meier's Civilization, and this build from around 2004 or so runs tolerably well on this computer, but again, I don't know how to play this game, and so can't really get too much of performance stuff. Next up, we're gonna look at Bejeweled 2. This game also runs perfectly fine, and I've been on a bit of a I'm quite interested in playing this game a lot again, because I like it. I actually got kind of sidetracked and kept playing it for quite a bit of time. And so let's look at a more recent Bejeweled game, Bejeweled Twist. Primarily because on the Windows Experience Index on Windows 7, it has a higher Experience Index score compared to Bejeweled 2. And it also handled this game very well. I should also bring up that this thing has integrated graphics, and so in terms of gaming performance, it's not guaranteed to have the best gaming performance. You can probably solve that by putting a graphics card in it, but for what I've tested so far, it's tolerable. Peggle also plays quite well, and mind you, this game has had performance issues on some computers that I've played it on in the past, primarily the MSI PR601, and I decided to try to speed through all the levels while still playing the game well for this occasion. Second to last, we have Half-Life. I'm looking at the tutorial here, as I have done in some cases, and it runs very well, although honestly, once again, for the bajillionth time on this channel, I expect for it to be performing quite well, because this is a game from 1998, even though it was quite demanding of the Toshiba Tecra that I looked at in the middle of last year. So, and last but not least, as per tradition, Toho. Heading back to Toho 7 in this case, it runs perfectly well, even though like the ThinkCentre M58 that I looked at a month ago, the FPS very quickly goes from between 59 and 60 and whatnot in some cases, but other than that, I don't really have any comments. And so, that's that. To conclude, arguably, I feel like this thing isn't that bad. I would argue I probably need to improve my benchmarking stuff, but I would argue that it's honestly fairly decent, despite the fact that my experience for this video was a bit marred due to Zorin OS nuking itself, but I feel like we should look at some other computers, although we do need to address something first next week.